Last year, the CMHC estimated a shortage of just over 3.5 million homes. This year, it's just under at 3.45 million, a very slight difference. The federal government kicked off today's caucus, or the federal Liberals, I should say, with an announcement to that, aimed at addressing that issue, I should say, that allocated $74 million of the $4 billion Housing Accelerator Fund to London, Ontario, aimed at fast-tracking 2,000 new homes over 3 years. Here tonight to talk about how to address the housing crisis is our front bench panel. Former Deputy Director of Tax Policy to former Finance Minister Bill Morneau. Elliott Hughes is here. He's now a Senior Associate with Summa Strategies. Former Alberta MLA and Cabinet Minister Gary Mar is with us. He's the President and CEO of the Canada West Foundation. Anne McGrath is National Director of the NDP. And Marika Walsh rounds us out. She's a Senior Political Reporter with the Globe and Mail. Hi, everybody.
Hello. Very
nice to see you. Marika's there covering the announcement. I wanted to start off with you because your question to the Prime Minister is actually why I started off my interview with the Housing Minister in the same vein. Basically, the CMHC says, here's the gap that needs to be filled. Is that going to be the goal of the efforts you lead, right? Not to say that other governments clearly don't have a role here, but if you're going to come out with a new housing plan, will it try to reach that goal? The Prime Minister didn't answer your question, but the Housing Minister says, yes, for sure, we will. What do you make of that?
Well, I think I'm a bit confused, actually, by the messages coming from the government, because the Housing Minister also earlier today said that essentially we would be seeing this never-before-seen-in-Canada announcement from the Prime Minister today, setting expectations very high, and then only to be sort of fallen flat by the fact that the Prime Minister announced new funding, or sort of money from old funding that's finally coming more than a year later than it was supposed to be, according to the federal government's own budgeting. And so I think when you're seeing the soaring rhetoric from the Housing Minister talking about big things coming, and then we're seeing such incremental announcements coming from the Prime Minister and him when they actually get to the podium, I think there's even more questions then about what they actually plan to do, how they plan to do it, and how quickly they'll do it.
I think the rhetoric, Anne, has certainly changed, right? There's a real acknowledgement every time I do an interview now that, okay, Canadians want more, we are going to do more. But to Marika's point, the way in which they telegraphed this and sort of leaked this announcement yesterday was as though it was the #1 announcement to get the new housing plan, whatever it may be, on the go. And to Marika's point, it ended up being, part of an important program, the Housing Accelerator Fund, but just the first of one of many different announcements that you would expect.
Yeah, I mean, there's an old truism in politics about increasing expectations, and the usual one is
under-delivering.
Exactly.
The way I live my life.
But that's exactly what they did here. They completely overpromised and under-delivered, right? So I think it's good that we're getting started on the Housing Accelerator Fund. It feels a little bit like a bit of a drop in an ocean of bad news. So the crisis in housing is very big, and so to kind of really trumpet this relatively small announcement just seems like a misstep, and which is unusual and interesting, because I do feel like one of the things that this government has been good at is communications. As a matter of fact, probably better at photo ops and communications than many other governments. But the place that they have a problem with is implementation and delivery. And in this case, they really illustrated that by the way that they trumpeted it.
A couple of things from a policy perspective stood out to me, Elliott, and I'm wondering what you think about that. The Prime Minister's rhetoric today in his press conference was much more antagonistic toward mayors than he has been in the past, and a bit more evocative of what we've heard from the Tories over the last number of months when they talk about what is kind of to blame, or how they would characterize what is to blame for how slow housing supply kind of gets built. And then the second thing he said was about the price of homes. He basically, and I don't have it word for word, I'll make sure I find it, but basically said housing prices are too high. He didn't say they should go down, but he said they are too high, and he hadn't said that before either. What do you take from that?
Well, I think the point around the mayors is interesting, and as you say, it's perhaps one of the first times he's actually been this explicit in that. And I think what it's all about is, look, an acknowledgement that everyone has to play a part here. I would quibble a little bit with folks on the panel saying that this wasn't a very big announcement. Look, this was $75 million to the City of London. The mayor himself said this is going to be transformational, essentially. And not only is it going to build 2,000 homes the next couple of years, but it's going to continue to build homes many years after that. So perhaps it wasn't this earth-shattering announcement that they touted, but we should make no mistake that this is a very big deal for the City of London. If the government can continue doing these announcements across the country in communities and in, if I'm frank, important electoral communities, that's going to resonate, that's going to matter. But to the point around the Prime Minister's comments around specifically about the mayors, I think it's the first time, and I would suspect we're going to hear a lot more from the Prime Minister about mayors getting more directly involved, setting a higher expectation and telling them, hey, listen, there's money sitting here from the federal government. It's up to you to come and get it. We all need to work together on this. Let's get going.
Will they be able to do that, Gary, and still contrast themselves as they have over the past few months with the Conservatives? Like the Conservatives' plan, Mr. Poilievre's plan that he's put forward is that you would tie money to municipalities for infrastructure to their ability to be able to increase their housing supply, and that they'd qualify for a bonus of sorts, which he has not been extremely specific about, if they were to exceed that increase in supply. The Liberals have so far told me in interviews, that's a stick approach. We want to take a carrot approach. Does that become a little bit different now if they start, being more direct about mayors, or being more critical, I should say, about mayors?
Well, I think it's an interesting point that the Leader of the Opposition makes, and maybe I would go back to comments that were made by Minister Fraser, who said, we want to redouble our efforts to work with other levels of government, the provinces and the municipalities. And I think that any solution that comes only from the federal government is not going to be much of a solution to this issue. If you look at what happened after the Second World War, there was 1 million homes built in the post-decade after the Second World War. This was a tremendous effort, but it required the efforts of the federal, the provincial, and the municipal governments. I like this approach as expressed by Minister Fraser, so I hope that there will be collaboration. When you think about the tools that the federal government has, it may be tax levers. With the province, it might be the infrastructure needed to build these facilities, and with respect to the municipalities, it may be with respect to the zoning and permitting process. All three levels of government have to be engaged, and the solutions may look very different in Edmonton than they might be in Etobicoke, Ontario. So, the provincial government here in Alberta made an announcement that they're putting millions of dollars into, upgrading their existing stock of affordable housing, and I expect that there will probably be more that comes from the provincial government level, and I know municipalities are also very interested in this subject matter, because they're the ones at the coalface. They're the ones that see the individuals that really need help.
Well, and also, Marika, to put it in more crass terms, like every level of government in every province and the federal, like they are facing pressure. This is a demand from Canadians right now because they are unable to buy a home. The numbers that came out today for rents, we're looking at the average rent over $2,000 in August, according to rentals.ca. Like there is a political pressure on them to do something too.
Absolutely there is. And I think that's what's so interesting and in part confusing about where this federal government is right now, because they spent the entire summer talking about a cabinet shuffle that was focused around affordability and around housing, putting a priority focus on that again, sort of recentering the government. And then they had this cabinet retreat where the top priority was housing again. And fast forward a few more weeks, and we still don't actually have a clear picture from them on whether this is about executing on the plans they've already promised or about more and how much more. And I think that's feeding the perceptions among voters that they don't have everything together and everything on top of it on the message on the issue of housing. And it's the most important issue, as we're hearing over and over again from MPs. So they're going to return to the House of Commons next week a bit unclear in what they're actually pitching and how they're countering Pierre Poilievre.